All right there, everyone. South Africa's High Court has cleared the way for the government to expropriate white-owned farmland. That is what we'll be talking about on today's video. If this is your first time here, a very warm welcome to you. I post 2 videos a day analyzing current events in light of conservative trends. So let me encourage you to smack that bell and subscribe button. We are on our way to 100,000 subscribers, and it'll be an absolute privilege to have you as one of them. All right, so Reuters is reporting that South Africa's High Court has officially cleared the way for the government to begin the process of mass land seizures from white farmers. Specifically, the High Court rejected a legal challenge by a group known as AfriForum, which is a legal group representing a number of white farmers, wherein they challenged the legality of the land grab, citing inconsistencies in a number of committee procedures and reports that recommended the change to the South African constitution that would in fact allow the government to expropriate, to take land currently owned by white farmers and redistribute it back to the black population. It's a thoroughly racially charged action undertaken by the African National Congress there. And unfortunately, it is now officially legal. The High Court there rejected the legal challenge, and in so doing has in fact given the government the green light to begin expropriations as soon as the Constitution is formally changed. Now, just so that we're all clear on this measure to take land away forcibly from white farmers without any compensation was passed in the South African Congress through the influence of the black Marxist leader Julius Malema, who's risen as a serious presidential contender for next year's national election. Malema is a radical leftist populist who's been calling for the expropriation of white-owned farmland to be returned, as he puts it, to black Africans. He's infamous for using the most violent language imaginable, even threatening to begin the process of indiscriminately killing white people, all in the name of a kind of ethnic cleansing from within the confines of South Africa. And so as a way of countering the effects and political momentum of Malema, South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa has made land expropriation, well, frankly, central now to his administration's agenda. He's pledged to return the lands owned by white farmers since the 1600s back to the black citizens of the country, since, after all, the land was taken under colonialism and apartheid. So, in effect, you took the land from us, now we're taking it back from you, and that's that. Now, of course, no white farmer that currently owns any land has taken that land from anyone. They own it fair and square, as it were. What you have operating here is group identity theory, cultural Marxist theory that sees individuals as part of irreconcilable racial groups that are in turn treated according to the place, the social status that's been assigned to that minority racial group by a majority racial group. Now, of course, if this was whites doing this to blacks or any other non-white minority group, the entire Western world would be up in arms against this. They'd be calling it racist and neo-fascist and Nazism and denouncing it in the absolute sense, but not here. I don't know if you remember, but when President Trump announced that he had directed Secretary of State Mike Pompeo to closely study the South African land farm seizures and expropriations, and indeed the violence and killing of white farmers there in South Africa. When he made that statement, the New York Times came out and said that President Trump, and I'm quoting them, cited false claims of widespread attacks on white farmers in South Africa, close quote. The Kansas City Star accused Trump of racism. Now, the funny part in all this, actually, it's ridiculously sad, but the irony of all of this is that Julius Malema, the radical South African Marxist racist politician, he came out and said bluntly, well, yeah, that's exactly what we're doing. We're absolutely expropriating farmland from white farm owners who stole that land from us. That is exactly what we're doing. In fact, while all of our media elite were excoriating our president for his supposed racism, Malema was actually confirming Trump's concerns. He was actually championing the whole notion of the South African government rectifying past injustices committed against blacks by South African whites. And I think it was Tucker Carlson who said it best when addressing the rhetoric of these so-called journalist pieces. He said their rhetoric was nothing short of Orwellian. Because if you think it through, it is now, according to our globalist media liberal elites, it is now racist to oppose racism. I mean, you just have to let that hit you. It's now racist to oppose racism. And so since we can't oppose this racism without being racist, you actually have journalists who comprise our media elite, who our journalists are now defending the African National Congress's actions by referring to their policy of, get this, post-apartheid land reform. Well, does that sound so sophisticated? Post-apartheid land reform, which is being undertaken precisely in order to rectify the past evils of apartheid and the unfair land distribution where over 70% of farmland has been owned by white farmers. And so, according to our elites, it's completely understandable why the idea of nationalizing all of this land is growing in popularity. Did you catch that? I mean, it's perfectly understandable why the idea of stealing the land owned only by those who have a particular skin color is growing in popularity. It's understandable. Even the Reuters piece covering the High Court's decision, even that piece said that land remains what they called a hot-button issue in South Africa because the racial inequality that marked South Africa for so long remains entrenched. Even 2 decades after apartheid was ended, racial inequality remains entrenched because of all the land the black majority were dispossessed of by this white minority. So that continued racial entrenchment makes land ownership a hot-button issue. Not an issue where people are currently being targeted by the government for land expropriation precisely because of the color of their skin. No. That's not what's happening here. What's happening here is it's a hot-button political issue. You know, like taxes, cutting entitlements, austerity measures. Now, I have a question. If you think it through, what's the difference between how these liberal leftists are writing about what's going on in South Africa and what Julius Malema would write? What's the difference? I guess Malema would go so far as to say, as he has, that he isn't advocating the killing off of white people just yet. And when asked whether white people in South Africa were legitimately concerned because of his statements like that, Malema just said they were being crybabies. They're just crybabies. I frankly don't see much of a difference between Malema's blatantly racist politics and those advocated by our journalist and media elite. When all is said and done, and I do think that South Africa is the case of this, we are seeing the dark side of nationalism. I talked about this with Willem Peltzer, who's in South Africa. He covers all things from the ground, as it were. Willem has a great YouTube channel that you want to check out that dives deeply into what's going on in post-apartheid South Africa from a nationalist populist perspective. But we talked about this, and that if a multi-ethnic nation's cultural structures have been so weakened by globalism that it can't sustain a renewed civic nationalism, a nationalism around a common set of civic practices, customs, legal proceedings, an economy that together create a kind of meta-culture that contains a number of microcultures and ethnicities, like in Russia. If the basic frames of reference necessary for civic nationalism have been weakened, inevitably the nation's going to collapse into a form of ethno-nationalism, where dominant ethnicity or race becomes synonymous with the national constitution. And I think this is precisely what we're seeing with the rhetoric of Julius Malema, and at least to a certain extent, President Ramaphosa. South Africa is beginning to look more and more like an ethno-state, and whites will be increasingly marginalized from any meaningful participation in public and civic life. And they'll have Western elite liberals to largely thank for that, since they saw what was happening but couldn't understand it apart from their cultural Marxist ideologies, which they ironically share with Julius Malema. So, of course, we'll continue to keep our eye on things. I have a number of videos that have examined the developments going on there in South Africa that I'll link below for you if you're interested in pursuing this more. And of course, check out Willem Petzer's channel. He's really doing God's work down there. He's an excellent resource in South Africa. But the big takeaway in all of this, a post-globalist age involves the exciting resurgence of civic nationalism all over the world, but it also involves a number of inevitable ethno-states and ethno-nationalisms that are going to leave a number of races and ethnicities disenfranchised in what was once their own countries. A development made all the more tragic by the complicity played by globalism's dying cultural Marxists here in the West. As always, please like, comment, and subscribe. Check out our new merchandise selection where you can get all of our gear and apparel celebrating all things nationalist, populist, and traditionalist. And if you would, please click on our Patreon link below. Become a monthly supporter of this channel. As you know, we are periodically demonetized by YouTube, and we can really use your help so we can continue to analyze current events in light of conservative trends so that you can personally and professionally flourish. God bless.